Welcome to today's Explainer. Have you ever felt this strange, nagging tension in the back of your mind when you do something that doesn't quite align with who you think you are? Well, today we're diving deep into the hidden psychological forces that are driving our everyday decisions, often without us even having a clue it's happening.
Right off the bat, I want you to think about a time you did something you knew for a fact was just a terrible idea. And I want you to ask yourself why you still did it. Maybe you smashed the snooze button instead of hitting the gym, or you impulse bought something you definitely couldn't afford, or maybe you told a tiny white lie even though you pride yourself on being an honest person. Why do we actually do these things? And honestly, how do we live with ourselves right after? The answer is tied to a fascinating psychological mechanism that basically acts like a tiny referee inside our heads.
That uneasy feeling you get actually has a formal name. Back in 1957, this pioneering psychologist named Leon Festinger called it cognitive dissonance. You can think of it as your mind becoming a literal battleground between what you know you should do and what you actually end up doing. It's this mental discomfort that flares up the second our actions clash with our core values, or whenever we try to hold two completely conflicting ideas in our head at the exact same time.
Let's look at smoking to really make this concrete. On one hand, you have an indisputable fact. Smoking causes cancer and can kill me. But on the other hand, the reality is, I smoke cigarettes every single day. Humans fundamentally hate contradiction, so this stark mismatch sets off massive psychological alarm bells. Your brain simply cannot tolerate this level of inconsistency without scrambling to do something to fix it.
So, the big takeaway here is that our brains are totally hardwired to crave internal consistency and harmony. We desperately want our thoughts, our words, and our actions to line up perfectly. As this quote from the Decision Lab highlights, when we don't have that internal harmony, we experience some very real psychological discomfort. We feel anxious, guilty, stressed, or even embarrassed. It's a genuine physical tension acting as a fire alarm in our minds, and it is demanding to be shut off.
So how do you actually catch yourself in the act? Well, you want to look for the physical tells. Maybe you get suddenly anxious right before making a decision, or you catch yourself spinning these wild, elaborate excuses to justify something you just did. You might even notice yourself deliberately dodging articles that challenge your worldview, or you suddenly develop this highly selective memory that only recalls facts supporting your side. Or, just downplaying the whole thing by saying, it's really not that big of a deal.
To release all this cinematic tension built up in our minds, our brains deploy some pretty clever defense mechanisms. Now, we could just change our behavior, right? Like finally quitting smoking. But let's be real, that is really hard. So we usually take mental shortcuts instead. We'll change our original beliefs, we'll make up elaborate rationalizations to justify what we did, or we just completely bury our heads in the sand to fake a sense of harmony, even if that balance is totally flawed.
Check out this wild experiment from 1959 by Festinger and Carl Smith. They asked participants to lie to other people and tell them that a remarkably boring task was actually super fun. Half the people were paid $20 to lie, and the other half got just $1 single. Counterintuitively, the people paid $1 actually ended up convincing themselves the task was genuinely fun. Why? Because a single dollar just wasn't enough to justify lying, so their brains literally altered their own reality to resolve the guilt of being a liar.
Let's bring this into everyday life and see how it builds into our modern routines. Imagine a guy named John. He's an avid environmentalist, drives an electric car, leads climate marches, the whole shebang. One day, he finds out his absolute favorite daily coffee brand severely pollutes local water ecosystems. Boom, massive existential crisis. But instead of going through the pain of finding a new coffee, John takes the easy way out. He resolves his eco-guilt by just dismissing the pollution data as fake news. He actively ignores reality just to protect his self-image.
Or how about what psychologists call effort justification? Imagine you're an impulse shopper. You spend a small fortune and wait in line for hours for a concert ticket, only for the show to be objectively terrible. Admitting the show was bad means admitting you completely wasted your money and your time, which is a deeply uncomfortable pill to swallow. So what do? You aggressively convince yourself and literally anyone who will listen that this terrible concert was actually a misunderstood avant-garde masterpiece. You'll do anything to cure that buyer's remorse. And we see this play out constantly on our screens. Take the social media arguer. In the realm of public policy and politics, people frequently dodge new information that contradicts their chosen allegiances. When someone is presented with undeniable facts that challenge their views, they'll often just double down on their original stance. But here's the thing, they aren't necessarily doing this to be malicious. It's just that facing the discomfort of being wrong about something so deeply tied to their core identity is psychologically unbearable.
There is this brilliant quote by social psychologist Elliot Aronson and Carol Tavares that hits the nail right on the head. They wrote, "When people feel a strong connection to a political party, leader, ideology, or belief, they are more likely to let that allegiance do their thinking for them and distort or ignore the evidence that challenges those loyalties." It is incredibly important to realize this isn't a left or right thing. It's a mechanical human reflex that applies to all of us. We protect our identity at the cost of staying uninformed.
But this doesn't just affect our wallets or our online debates. It can actually impact our physical survival. Think about medical avoidance. Surprisingly, studies show that this mental tug-of-war causes people to develop negative attitudes toward life-saving medical tests. People who were eligible for a highly beneficial but uncomfortable virus screening suddenly became highly skeptical of the screening's validity. They literally changed their entire attitude toward medical science simply to avoid the immediate anxiety of the procedure itself.
So where do these intense conflicts actually come from? Usually it boils down to one of two scenarios. First up is forced compliance. This is where you're pressured by a boss, a social group, or an authority figure to do something against your true beliefs. To survive that discomfort, you might slowly shift your beliefs to match what you were forced to do. The second scenario is free choice, where you're agonizing over a decision between two equally appealing options. Once you finally make the choice, the tension of potentially missing out on the other option forces your brain to rewrite your own narrative to justify what you picked.
And we handle that post-decision anxiety through a really fascinating mental trick called the spreading of alternatives. Once a difficult choice is made, we artificially inflate how amazing our chosen option was while simultaneously trashing the option we left behind. Think about it. If you had to choose between two similar cars, the second you buy one, you start hyper-focusing on its amazing fuel economy, while suddenly convincing yourself the car you didn't buy was probably going to break down anyway. You spread the alternatives apart in your mind so you can feel safe in your choice.
Now here is why all of this really matters, and what you absolutely should take away from this explainer today. If we constantly ignore our reactions to dissonance, if our default setting is to just reject facts, rationalize our bad behavior, and avoid uncomfortable truths, we end up living in a totally fabricated reality. Over time, making decisions in the absence of truth will severely erode trust, ruin your closest personal relationships, stall your career, and, as we've seen, profoundly compromise your physical health.
So how do we actually fix this? How do we hack our own brains? Well, the solution is to actively resist that natural urge to rationalize. We have to train ourselves to reframe how we view changing our minds. Instead of seeing a change of opinion as this painful defeat or a sign of weakness, we need to excitedly condition ourselves to associate it with gratification, growth, and gain. It definitely takes practice, but we absolutely can make the acceptance of truth a learned automatic response. As the Decision Lab so elegantly puts it, accepting conflict can be a good thing when it prompts important changes. We really must learn that internal mental conflict isn't some monster to run away from. That feeling of guilt or unease is actually a vital alarm bell ringing in your mind. It's your brain signaling an incredible opportunity to wake up, make better, more honest choices, and to finally align your daily actions with your true, authentic values.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. What is a belief you are defending right now simply because changing it would be just too uncomfortable? What hidden contradictions are currently sitting in your own blind spots, quietly directing your life from the shadows? Take a moment today to face that discomfort head-on. It might just be the most liberating decision you ever make. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.